Live from the nation's capital, you're in the war room. It's Monday, the 30th of November, the year of our Lord 2020. We're going to go live to Arizona in a second. The hearing's going on. Jack, what are you hearing? You just told me something about this hearing.
Well, we were hearing earlier that this hearing could go late into the night. So this is how many witnesses have something to say about the irregularities in Arizona. And I'll tell you what, for our listening audience, it should give everybody a little bit of courage because these people are coming forward. We heard earlier how hard it is for some of these people to come out and say and speak to the truth. Well, now is the time, and it makes me proud to watch them come forward, Steve.
Makes me proud, but I got to tell you, for a audience of American citizens, you would be sick to your stomach listening to this. This is outrageous. And in the middle of this, to have the Arizona Secretary of State and the governor essentially certify the vote. If we've seen that is a tale of two cities, this whole process has been a tale of two parties because you have the establishment Republicans, whether it's Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and today in Georgia, Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, they folded the tent. In Georgia, they want to fold the tent. And in Arizona, they would love to fold the tent. And you have patriots out there fighting. We want to go now inside the room to Real America's Voice. Ben Bergquam. Ben, you've been doing massive reporting out there since the beginning. Tell us what the day's been like so far at this hearing.
Yeah, you're right. The reporting, as you mentioned, it is, it's breathtaking to hear some of what's being claimed, and today in particular, the statistics, using statistical analysis to find out the probabilities of what we've just seen. And Bobby Pitton just spoke. I'll be interviewing him in just a minute. He's one of the witnesses here today. And basically what we're hearing from multiple people, Dr. Shiva before him, the colonel earlier today, is it is not only improbable, it is statistically impossible to see the numbers that we saw in this election. And the scary part in the last in his last comments, I'm actually outside right now with some of the overflow. There were probably a couple thousand people out here earlier. There's maybe a few hundred out here still across the streets, just listening to the hearing that couldn't get in. But some of the crazy things were Dr. Shiva, his point about in order for Joe Biden to win the way he won, he would have had to have received, based on the analysis that they've done, 130% of the Democrat vote, and President Trump would have had to receive negative 30% of the Democrat vote. It's just what is clear. There is something major wrong with our elections, and in particular here in Arizona. The scary thing is, as you mentioned, they seem to be tone deaf, the governor, Ducey, and the Secretary of State, or they're just so used to it that they don't care anymore, that they would certify a fraudulent election, potentially. It's unconscionable to think that these people, our representatives, would just throw away our votes like they appear to be doing.
What has been the crowd response outside? I see the audience applauding all the time, which is extraordinary for hearings. But what is the general audience response? Because I got to tell you, Ben, when you see this from people like, cyber experts like Phil Waldron, and who's a very science, data, tech guy, very precise. Dr. Shiva, I think he's got 9 degrees from MIT. He got his first degree at like 6. Right, he invented email when he was 3.
That was Al Gore, Steve.
Yeah, no, this was Dr. Shiva is literally the man with 2 brains. Okay, but his presentation, you're getting so angry, and here's why I think at least I get angry. They could care less. This is so blatant, so in your face, and they could care less even about addressing it. They say, "Oh, this is baseless." This is if the Republican Party doesn't understand that you got to make your stand right here, they're missing it. Because if we don't reverse this, it's over, right? Because they're going to know they can just do something so outrageous and nothing will happen. Ben, what's the feeling out there in Arizona?
Yeah, absolutely. The feeling is they're pissed off. I mean, these people see it. They're out here. They've seen it for years. And Bobby Pitton's last. In his testimony, he said his statistical analysis goes back to proving basically that this started in 2008. And the frustrating thing for so many people is that it's almost like the Republicans have just accepted the fraud. Like they've accepted this is just how it's done. They beat us again. Yeah, they cheated. We just know it. We've just become accustomed to it. I'll tell you what, the people out here, the voters across America, they haven't become accustomed, not willing to become accustomed to it, because if we do, this country is gone. I mean, it literally, I'm sitting through it. I'm just, like you're saying, you're watching, I'm sitting there listening. I'm like, how is this possible? How in the greatest country in the history of the world have we gotten to a place where this is acceptable?
Hey, Ben.
It's not acceptable.
Ben,
that's the question, is how do we fix it? How do we remedy it?
Ben, I have a question for you, because I was watching it, and I saw you actually in the hearing room. You were watching as well. And as time went on, you could feel the energy in that room had changed. People were becoming kind of a little bit nervous in their seats. They were hearing things that were shocking them. And by the end, it looked like they were ready to get up out of their seats and demand change here. So I think all of this is a positive thing, and I want the American people to watch it, because no matter what, we are the last guardians of this Constitution. And we're talking about many of these places where these voting machines need to be taken care of down in Georgia, whether or not they're being looked after. Hey, American sheriffs out there, we rely on you too. This is not going to end in Arizona. It's not going to end in Pennsylvania. There are too many patriots who are willing to stand their ground. Thank you so much, Arizona.
Ben, what is the process going forward? You know, Jack started when we came on here. Jack said he's hearing on Twitter that this thing could go 12 hours. What is the process for today? And then what are Rudy and his troops out there, and the state senators and the delegates, what do they hope to do? Is this where they're going to press upon Ducey, who just oversaw the certification of this thing, to actually call a special session and take some action as the clock ticks down to the 14th of December?
Yes. So bottom line, they need an audit of all of the votes. This is we can't just reshuffle the deck as we've seen in so many other places like Georgia. We need to audit all of the votes. One of the problems as you've been watching is when you've separated the mail-in ballots from the actual votes, there's no way of reconnecting those. Is what they're saying, but there has to be a way of either discounting those votes because they weren't able to review those, they weren't able to audit those, but they have to be able to audit the actual votes themselves, and that's what they're calling for, a special session by the state legislature that requires the Secretary of State and the Speaker of the House of Arizona to call for it, and that is the message that I'm hearing, to put pressure on the Secretary of State, the Speaker of the House, and the Governor to demand a special session to audit the entire vote and take each one of these credible allegations, consider each one of them, and then ultimately you have to decide, is the election in its entirety fraudulent? Do you have to revote, or does it come back to, as you've mentioned several times before, the Supreme Court then throwing it back to the states to choose those delegates? So the remedy is, there's several different options once we get to that point, but initially there has to be an audit by the Secretary of State and the Speaker of the House in Arizona.
That audit would take how long, do you think? How long would it actually take to accomplish an audit?
I couldn't even tell you. I was here for the counting of the votes, and that took 2 weeks. I mean, we sat through. They started doing 140,000 a day. They got down to doing 6,000 a day. It would take a long time. I mean, it's not a simple thing to do when you're going back through every single vote, every single ballot, and verifying that that it's not fraudulent, making double checking the double votes. One of the other things that was brought up in Maricopa County alone, they estimated that 5,700 votes were cast by people that had left Arizona and were voting from places like California and other states across the nation. 5,700 votes in Maricopa County alone. So there's so many different ways fraud was committed. That process may take some time, but the bottom line is you have to do it, or you decertify and you toss out those votes.
Ben Bergquam, Real America's Voice. No, you got to get back inside. Thank you so much for sharing that. Look, in this situation you've got in Arizona as they go through it, you've got voter fraud, you've got election fraud, you have election administration malpractice. This is a disgrace. This is a disgrace. And to sit there, if it's 14 hours, we're only a third of the way through it. And they could go 14 hours. But my point is that the stuff is so detailed. The illegal alien voting, the people have moved out of state voting, the duplicate voting. It's on and on and on. And the potential manipulation of these machines. It's one thing we've seen today. We're going to have Brian Kennedy on at the bottom of the hour. If you're a rational human being, regardless of your political philosophy, I think you have seen the end of electronic voting. today. If half of what these guys say is true, it's got to be all paper all the time. It's the electronics. You're just opening yourself up to problem. Jack, and then Greg, your observation. You guys have watched this all day.
100% agree with you on the death of electronic voting, but also one of the things that was disturbing today, you had some of the experts on there complaining that they simply could not get their hands on the data over and over again. They had roadblocks within state government at the federal level to get their hands on data to compare things like Social Security master death lists.
But what's obvious and what you've done is that they don't want you to get the data. The roadblocks are. This is not an act of omission. This is an act of commission.
Steve, a bulldog for the signal from the noise. I was getting to that. There is this sensibility that there are people who are making it difficult, almost like the rear echelon has kind of abandoned us up on the front lines. But the beautiful thing is I'm up on the front lines with all of you, so we could stand a little abandonment here.
Another major issue that was brought up was the fraudulent absentee balloting that was done, where people were made aware that they had cast an absentee ballot and then on the spot refuted that, said, no, I did not. And this was something that was brought up multiple times and of real concern.
This happened all across the country. We found this on a massive level in Pennsylvania. There were multiple people who voted before their ballots were even sent to them. So when they arrived to vote,
they didn't vote.
Yeah,
someone voted in their name.
Someone voted in their name.
Someone voted in the name.
So when they're like, hey, I never got a ballot, and they show up to vote, they have to fill out a provisional. Well, once they do that and they go, oh, well, one was mailed in, so the provisional and the one that was mailed in gets washed. So it's no vote. But if it gets through the cracks, it's a vote for their guy. This is going on all across the country. The American people, I think you have to stand tall. And I think you also have to have a little bit of confidence in the fact that there are good people fighting on your behalf and that the truth will come out. The light of day is going to be shown on this. And I think it's going to be shocking.
How are you
sure?
How are you sure of that? Because outside of One America, outside of Newsmax, what Real America's Voice is doing, GTV, the for the diaspora of the Chinese people, has got a live crew there. 5 other sites like that. You go to Populist Press or Revolver, they get up as a lead. But forget the mainstream media, Fox Business, Fox News, not touching this. So you say the light's going to be shined on it. It's going to take an effort. What they hope is that crowd a couple of weeks ago was 5,000. Today it's 1,000, right? In Pennsylvania, you had a rally, but it wasn't a 25,000 person rally. It was a couple thousand people, and they just hope that over time they're going to wait you out. Right?
I think of it more like this, though. The American population, we're all pretty good people. Most of us aren't easy to anger. We're slow to get started, but once we get moving, I think we are an unstoppable force. And I see, just watching the live stream, somebody said, hey, American Indian here from Arizona, and we are super angry, right? Because they know that they got grifted too if this whole vote thing was a
I hear
scam.
you, but Pennsylvania today, I tell you what, let's get to that. We're going to yes, the American people, and I think particularly Trump voters, are besides themselves. And if they open themselves up to look at this evidence, they'd be even more angry. That being said, you're having defeats. I mean, this thing in Pennsylvania today, you got to take it like it is. That is basically the finger to the president, the finger to the Trump movement, the finger to truth, and the legislature said, hey, we'll wait these guys out. We're not going to do it. Okay, we're going to be back in a second. We're talking about Pennsylvania. You got Boris Epshteyn from the campaign, Brian Kennedy from Arizona. All next. Bye.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to the War Room. We're live from Capitol Hill. We're going to go back to Arizona in a few minutes with Brian Kennedy and maybe pick up some of the inside. As Jack Maxey reported, they may go 12 hours a day. Rudy can keep. He's like the ever ready bunny. He just keeps on going, winding up. And
I gotta say, when you saw Rudy there in the chair with his sort of thoughtful Rudy, I'm taking down the mob face.
Yeah.
And then right behind him, you see Bernie Carrick with his elbows on his knees. I feel pretty good. That makes me feel a little extra confident.
That's a comfort zone. one of their colleagues is back in Washington anchoring the effort here while Jenna Ellis and Rudy are out in Arizona. That would be Boris Epshteyn. Boris, thank you for joining us today. Give us a view of the battlefield. We've had some bad news out of Pennsylvania, but great news out of Arizona. A real fight down in Georgia. We're hearing great news out of Wisconsin, although you wouldn't know that from the media. So walk us around. Maybe let's start in Arizona, where this hearing's going on today, and literally the level of detail. And by the way, I think as good as Gettysburg was, this was actually better for the analytics, the way you guys laid it out, because it left a brutal case that it was mathematically impossible for this to be pulled off by the Biden campaign. So, Boris, why don't we start in Arizona with your thoughts?
I think Arizona's been an absolute home run on several fronts. Talking about machines that were connected to the internet and easily hacked, talking about Republican observers excluded from the process, no signature verification on the mail ballots, indications of batches of ballots infused to evade detection, forensic audit that is needed to specifically identify which votes may or may not have been switched. I mean, the in-depth, as you mentioned, the in-depth facts that have been presented here, the analysis that have been presented here, absolutely underscore how much of a disaster this election in Arizona and around the country has been, and how much more information has to get out there in order to determine who won the most legal votes in Arizona and in the states we're talking about throughout the country. But again, specifically in Arizona, as you mentioned, and comparable to the way that Gettysburg went, there's been an overwhelming amount of detail presented, to the point where then the question has to be asked: how can the leaders of the Arizona Senate and House, and how can the governor of Arizona not call a special session of the legislature to determine what exactly happened in Arizona and who won the most legal votes? So if you look at Arizona, the more and more ground is forming for that determination. Georgia, as you said, it's a fight.
But hold on. Before I get to Georgia, I'm going there. What's the process from here going forward? Because this is not a special session. This is kind of an extra ordinary hearing. You're having an incredible amount of detail of evidence, actual evidence. Where do you go from here? Do you go back to court, or does Ducey call a special session and you actually present this to the legislative branch?
The hope is to be able to present it to the legislative branch and also to exhaust our legal options, and more information is going to be coming out about that in the next 24 to 48 hours on that front. But specifically on what's happening today, you're right. This is a hearing of legislators. The goal is that the information presented will make it inevitable that the legislature of Arizona calls itself or is called into special session by Governor Doug Ducey in order for all this evidence to be presented before the electors are actually sent from Arizona to Congress.
Because the Republican administration out there, like putting it in your face, actually certified the vote in the middle of the hearing.
They did. And we've talked about that on the show before, Steve. It is disappointing and bewildering that there are Republicans out there who want to rush the process instead of going through the motions, going through the paces, going through the facts, and determining something that's so reasonable to want to determine who won this election, who won the most legal votes. Was there wrongdoing in this election? And if you look at the information, if you look at the analysis, if you look at the experts, more and more it's coming out that, as you started this conversation with, there's nothing else that one could consider except for the fact that there was chicanery, the extreme chicanery that went on throughout this election process in states like Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada.
Tomorrow is 1 December. You've got two options you're dealing with in Arizona. One, you've got votes, but you've also now got evidence. And this thing is so close there, it's just 10,000. I think the illegal alien vote they're talking about alone is 2x that. But it's about time. You've got the safe harbor on the 8th. You've got the Electoral College, which is the hardwired, can't go beyond, on the 14th of December. So essentially you got, 15 days, maybe 14. And you're taking two tracks. One's courts and the other special session. You're not there to either one yet. You haven't filed court, and you're tonight have your evidence, and you'll go with cup in hand and beseech the all-powerful Governor Ducey to get the Secretary of State and make something happen. When do you start running out of time in Arizona, do you think?
But it's actually not quite correct. If you remember last week, a very important lawsuit was filed with Kelly Ward, the GOP chairwoman, as the plaintiff, in order to dig deeply into the balloting in Maricopa County in terms of whether observers were allowed, in terms of whether signatures match, and in terms of whether the reconstructed or duplicate fixed ballots were handled correctly. And there's now been action in that case, and that ballots are going to be inspected. 100 signatures are going to be inspected. 100 duplicate ballots are going to be inspected. So there is activity on the court side, on the judicial side, and as you said, on the legislative side, there's the in-depth hearing today, and on the information that's being put out there, the extreme support that's out there for this session today, this hearing today. From what I understand, 1,000 or more people outside of the hearing who are voicing their support and voicing the necessity to determine who won the legal votes in the state of Arizona. So my perspective is that there's plenty of time, both on the court front, on the legal front, and on the legislative front.
Let's go to Wisconsin, because the mainstream media, you wouldn't know it. It's saying, oh, Trump paid $3 million and he's down another 100 votes. But they didn't report the buried lead that from 100,000 to 150,000 ballots that conservative groups and the campaign separately are arguing easily should be thrown out. Where do we stand with Wisconsin right now?
Well, exactly right. We've talked about this, and the media is doing the same thing in Arizona as they're doing in Wisconsin. What they don't realize is that the time to make these the election contests in these states is after this quote-unquote certification. And all a certification is, that is not a constitutional process. That is just a really clerical. This is a clerical move that's made. That's all it is. So these quote-unquote certifications, they don't mean that electors are sent. That means that there's a clerical determination on the election, but that doesn't mean that contests are exhausted. So in Wisconsin, this recount has been finished. The results of the recount were expected because the Democrat to Republican count is 2-1 on those folks who adjudicate any contest on any specific ballots, both in Milwaukee and in Dane County. And now that sets up an opportunity to press our case further and to go and make it clear that, as you said, 100,000, 150,000, or as many as 200,000 ballots should not be counted because they contravene Wisconsin Constitution, Wisconsin law, which states, as we've talked about, that voting by mail, absentee voting, are a privilege. They're not a right. And there are 3 classifications of wrongful ballots that are being looked at. One is where an application was not granted, but an absentee or mail-in vote happened. 2 is where the clerks mishandled on purpose, purposefully mishandled an application or a ballot, and 3 that confined the confined fraction of folks who are supposed to be indefinitely confined, but they're determined to have not been so, but have said they were in order to be able to vote by mail or absentee. So again, you look at all these classifications, and from what I understand, what we expected to happen happened, which is the numbers that you talk about in a state where the difference is 20,000 votes in these 2 counties, Milwaukee and Dane, which are 70-30, 80-20 Biden-Trump. The numbers of ballots which should not be counted are apparently in the 100,000 and above range, which is extremely significant.
So how do you get that to get them to flip? Is that you're going to use the court system there? You don't go back to the legislature? Is this the courts? You're going to take this information and now ask for a forensic audit, or now do you go right to court and say these ballots got to be thrown out?
Don't want to get out of the process, but again, as I've said this to you before, and I think it's proven out to be correct, we will exhaust every single option we have in order to make sure that all ballots in Wisconsin are counted.
Okay, let's go to Georgia. I tell you what, Boris, would you mind? Do you have the time to stay over through the break? We want to go to Georgia and Pennsylvania, a couple other states, and then get your overview of where we're heading on this. Boris Epshteyn.
Sounds good. We'll do one more. Yep.
Yeah, Boris Epshteyn from the campaign. They're still going in Arizona. We're going to have Brian Kennedy after Boris is going to report to us from the room in Arizona. we may go back and get some live coverage. Also, there's a couple of bus tours down in Georgia right now. There's Amy Kramer and her daughter have put together this tour to go to all these battleground states. They're actually in Georgia right now. John Fredericks is taking a 10-city, 10-day. And this is all to get a feel for the Trump voter and where the Trump voter stands, particularly vis-a-vis the 5th of January, although we're saying, hey, let's focus on the work at hand. I think they're getting the same feedback. So we got a lot to get through in the show. We're going to have a lot more jammed in here in the next couple hours. Jack Max has been working around the clock with the statistical guys, probably going to present tomorrow, but he's got a couple of teasers he'll give you. And here's the amazing thing. All of this evidence, whether it's statistical, whether it's mathematical, whether it is from good old-fashioned ballot stuffing, whether it's the dead voting, illegal aliens, people from out of state, how they did these scams with going to people, taking their addresses that people hadn't voted in a while. On and on and on. The evidence is just overwhelming. It's incredible. And it ought to make every American mad. And it really ought to make the Trump movement mad. And I hope President Trump is watching this nonstop because he ought to be furious. Going to return with Boris Epshteyn.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to the War Room. It's Monday, the 30th, last day of November, the year of our Lord 2020. Boy, that month go quick from the time of the election till now. Boris Epshteyn joins us from Washington, D.C. Boris, let's go to Georgia. You know, the president had some tweets over the weekend saying, hey, and said to Maria Bartiromo, I don't know why I endorsed this guy. Basically made him the governor of Georgia because that's what happened when the president did endorse Kemp. And Kemp goes, oh, we follow the law. I mean, what exactly is going on down in Georgia? We got John Fredericks down there, and he said it's a revolt of the MAGA people. And you saw how Ronna McDaniel was lit up by, you know, standard Republicans coming to a meet or greet, talking about the January 5th. And they said, we don't want to talk about the 5th. We don't want to talk about the Senate runoff. We want to talk about what you're going to do to bring forward all the cheating that went on in Georgia, and so that we can close this. It's 12,000 vote difference. You know, Trump won this overwhelmingly. So where do we actually stand in Georgia from your perspective right now? Do we have Boris? Let's see. We'll get back to Boris Epshteyn in a second. Gotta ask.
Hey, Boris here. Here.
You got to hit. You got to take it off mute.
Well, no, it wasn't me. It was the deep state. That's what it was. Don't worry about it. Okay, Steve? They're always trying to silence me.
They keep,
okay?
you're on. I know. Since the 16 campaign, people don't know this. Boris was my head of surrogates. He's not silenceable until CNN and MSNBC and everybody goes, we're not going to take him. He's too good. He's relentless. So Boris was head of surrogates for the 16 campaign and actually crushed the management of CNN and MSNBC. They came back and said, no mas. We can't take it anymore, Boris. So, Boris, go ahead, brother.
That's a true story. There was a moment on the 16 campaign where I was banned by every major network.
He was banned,
including Fox News and Fox Business.
No, I called him.
They said no.
I had Jason call him up and said, how can they ban him? He's the head of our surrogate program. You can't ban the head of the surrogate program. He calls back and said they did. He's banned even by Fox Business. Unbelievable. But Boris, you're not banned here. The guys in Denver every now and again hit the kill switch, but we love you.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I appreciate the love. Appreciate the freedom. So the issue in Georgia is, you're right. I mean, for the 5th time, the campaign has asked for signature matching in Georgia. And maybe at this by this point, Brian Kemp wants to ban me. But the true issue is this. If we're having an honest recount in the state of Georgia, how can you have an honest recount without matching signatures? It makes absolutely no sense. So this campaign, the president, are obviously doing everything possible, publicly, legally, whichever channel is appropriate and open, to ensure that signature matching is actually done in Georgia. Because without that signature matching, with the fact that thousands of ballots have been discovered under every rock, it seems like, in throughout the state of Georgia, and that's in smaller counties and pro-Trump counties, of course. The fact that the amount of alleged election misdoing, election wrongdoing in Georgia has been so overwhelming There's absolutely no way to go and no way that you could determine who won the legal vote in Georgia without that signature matching. So the pressure is going to continue to be put on the state of Georgia to do what the people of Georgia want, which is to conduct a true and honest recount. It's not that complicated. It's actually pretty simple. But for some reason, the state of Georgia is still not agreeing to it. But this campaign, under the leadership of this president, are going to do everything possible to ensure that that occurs.
So if that alternative is not going to exist to you, because you win on that if you ever got that, what legal remedies are you taking in Georgia? We'll get Lynn Wood and those guys are separate, but what is the campaign actually pushing on?
The campaign is pushing legally to again, bring about that true and honest recount, because the recounts that have been done so far are absolutely not useful and are not a representation of the true and legal vote in Georgia. All they're doing is they're recounting the legal ballots and the illegal ballots. But that doesn't cure the problem. You can just, if I tell you that 2 + 2 is 5, and then you ask me, and I tell you that again, well, nothing got cured. Nobody got the check. Well, we want to check. We want to make sure 2 + 2 = 4. And it's pretty simple, and it should be done. It's the only lawful thing to do in the state of Georgia.
I know you're not associated with the
And the only way, by the way, that election can actually be fully determined to have been concluded in the state of Georgia is with signature matching.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's go to Lynn Wood is not part of the campaign. He's suing as a citizen representing Georgia voters and as a Georgia voter, I think. But he got a ruling last night in the middle of the night from a judge. It was a ruling, then it was reversed, and it went back. But it was about securing some of these machines that I guess they were getting ready to reset or to wipe for January 5th. The stunning thing was the two things. Number one, what the judge told him not to do. You're not to destroy any material. You're not to wipe any material. I mean, basically, you're not to put your hands on this thing until we have a hearing on Wednesday and essentially get rid of the evidence. Also, the state of Georgia argued that the biggest issue was about their contractor, their vendor, just a vendor, right? That doing this process might open up their access to their proprietary software. Like that's that big a deal when you're considering that this could tip a presidential election. The Lynn Wood situation, are you surprised by how much traction he's getting? He's the one fighting about this consent too, the Stacey Abrams consent. It seems like Lynn Wood every day is picking up some momentum here, Boris.
Well, Lynn Wood's a smart and talented attorney. There's no two ways about it. As you mentioned, he is acting on his own as part of his own group. But these issues are vital issues to determine and get to the bottom of. The consent decree, it's only supposed to be the state legislature which determines laws around voting for president in the state. Not supposed to be some extra legal consent decree between a governor and his secretary of state and the losing candidate for governor who just happens to be litigious. I mean, that makes no sense. That's what Stacey Abrams effectively bullied the governor and the secretary of state of Georgia into this consent decree, and that's not supposed to happen. That's not constitutional. So that's a major issue. And then on these machines, it was a very interesting series of rulings, as you mentioned, from that judge. And let's see what happens in the hearing on Wednesday. And it'll be very, very interesting and really vital to determine what actually occurred with the machines. And if Lynn Wood and his team are allowed to inspect them further, I expect more useful information to come out of that.
Look, even as I speak, I think the business of the Pennsylvania legislature is wrapping up and to go home. So we have to look at this as a catastrophic defeat, given at Gettysburg was the presentation about all this information that came out last week. And you had resolutions. You had to put this 1938 law in abeyance. You had the ability of people who wanted to come together and actually put forward electors that represented the real vote, not the fake vote. I know State Senator and Colonel Mastriano was in the Oval yesterday. I guess he was designated to have COVID, but clearly was meeting with the president over the weekend. Today can't be looked at as anything but a catastrophic loss. And I mean, quite frankly, the establishment there has beclowned themselves. The Speaker of the House, Cutler, Corman, the President pro tem of the Senate, all their consultants, just cowardice and gutlessness not to even have this thing go forward. How's the campaign look at not the legal side, not what you're doing in the courts, but the legislative side, which looked like last Wednesday you were going to get real traction because you came out of there with real muzzle velocity?
Well, it's obviously disappointing, right? There's no two ways about it. No happy talk. It's directly disappointing that this session is ending. But I actually did receive internally a step-by-step summary of what is left to do still in Pennsylvania, including with the legislature, and how there are ways for the legislature to act. But no two ways about it. If Republicans in Pennsylvania and Republicans across the country do not have the ability within them to find the strength to determine who won this election by counting just the legal votes, we've got a problem. And it's incumbent upon your listeners, all Americans, but mostly, obviously, the MAGA crowd, which is who we can depend on, to make it clear to your elected officials that you are depending on them and you're expecting from them no less than ensuring that the finalization of this election is only done once it's fully determined who won the legal votes, President Trump or former Vice President Joe Biden. And that's what President Trump said, too. All we want to know is who won the legal votes. So to go back to Pennsylvania, the answer has got to be, why are these folks going home? And can they reverse that process in some way and actually get to a determination of who won the most legal votes in Pennsylvania? Now, it's been laid out to me that it's possible. It is not a straightforward process. It's convoluted. And by the way that Pennsylvania, the legislature has acted so far, we hope that there may be people brave enough to go and do that. But judging on today, obviously, that we're not overly optimistic for the elected officials in Pennsylvania to do what they have to do. But that does not mean we will not keep fighting for that result.
For your perspective in Pennsylvania right now, where do you guys stand legally? What's the legal recourse? Since the legislative is probably done, what's the legal?
I'm going to push back on that a little bit. I don't think the legislative is fully done. Again, as I said, I think there is a path. It's not a straightforward path, but it is a path that we can look to legislatively, even though, as you said today, and that's a quirk in Pennsylvania law, and they have effectively a month with no legislature. But that does leave some options there. Legally, there is actually a wide array of options, from continuing to press forward in Pennsylvania court, state court, federal court, or, of course, and as we've talked about extensively, looking at the U.S. Supreme Court and how the U.S. Supreme Court would consider the decisions by the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court, which seem to contravene both the Pennsylvania Constitution and the federal Constitution.
Last thing, here you've got a president that got 95% of the Republican vote. He's overwhelmingly popular in the Republican Party. He's obviously got his own movement that is a major part of the Republican Party. I mean, in every indice you see, he won. He pulled down ticket guys across. He pulled senators across. Half the guys in the Senate, blunting those guys today from 16. Mitch is leader because of him. In Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, in Arizona, Mr. Boris Epshteyn, the leadership of the Republican Party is either actively working against the president or just so passive has to be essentially working against the interest of the team that you have in the MAGA crowd. The simple question people have is, what is going on here?
What's going on, unfortunately, is that there's some folks on the Republican side who believe that it's easier to play it safe. And we truly hope that they listen to their constituents. And the constituents look at what happened in Washington, D.C. Gosh, was that 3 weeks ago now? It seems like it was 2 minutes ago, or 2+ weeks ago in Washington, D.C. on that Saturday with a march for Trump. Peaceful and beautiful and uplifting. But you had probably, 1 million or more people speaking out and saying to their elected officials, go to work, stand strong, stand tough. And that's what the president's been calling for repeatedly, too, both on Fox with Maria Bartiromo and on Twitter. We need tough Republican officials who will stand strong and determine who won the most legal votes. And that's what it's all about. And by the way, I just got notice that Republican state lawmakers in Pennsylvania did introduce that resolution to dispute the results of the 2020 elections. So I believe that does open another window to go and pursue the legislative route in Pennsylvania, notwithstanding the fact that under their usual process, the session would be ending today.
Boris, how do you get social media, Parler and Twitter? How do people follow you?
Twitter, @BorisEP. Parler, the one and only @Boris. And my Instagram has been blowing up since I've been calling it out on War Room, Boris_Epshteyn. I'm on the gram, and there's a lot of exciting stuff I'm putting out there on that platform. And Steve, I don't know why you're not on there. You could be putting pictures of you hanging out, having coffee, wearing the same stuff every day, whatever you want.
It's very simple. I live vicariously through you on the gram. Okay, Boris Epshteyn, thank you very much from the campaign. Brian Kennedy next.
Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room. Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back. We're now going to go to Arizona and Brian Kennedy. Brian, thank you very much for joining us here in the War Room.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be with you. You know, by the way, when they do the movie version of all this, I think Vince Vaughn ought to play Boris. Don't you think? He has that. He has that same kind of, obnoxiousness,
exactly,
which I really admire.
The same. He rolls the same way. That's very good. Casting director. I want to introduce casting director Brian Kennedy. Listen, watching this on TV and watching it back here on the live stream today, I know you're in the room, but it was sickening. The level of detail, I mean, the detail, it was amazing, and the back of what Rudy's pulled together, both mathematically from the statistics, the cyber, Colonel Phil Walden, just incredible people, then the detail. But you sit there and go, Trump won this state by 100,000 votes plus. This is not even close. And it just seems so passive, the response from the Republican Party. In the room, does it come across, and I realize it's very methodical, but there's a certain intensity to it about particularly the people there. They're very upset. So put us in the room and tell us from your perspective, you were there, what it was like.
Yeah, no, it is. I think you said this. It's sickening in a way to hear all this, that the manipulation of the data had to have gone on in a certain way, just the carelessness of the voting process itself. The people who were running Dominion voting systems, the county registrars, the Secretary of State, in many cases, they're Democrats and had an interest in doing it in a sloppy way. But this is a system that is not befitting a great nation like ours, let alone a first world country. It really is if people just didn't care, what went on. And I think the people in the room are a bit sickened by the whole thing. Anybody watching should just be appalled. Inside, if there's that, outside, I'm looking at the crowd outside, and they're fired up. Everyday citizens, they remain irritated and pissed off about this whole thing. They think the election has been stolen, and they want justice. They don't think this is right. And I was listening to what you and Boris were saying. Yeah, today was a setback in Pennsylvania when it comes to these state legislators. But if we had good state legislators, we would have never have needed President Donald Trump. But we have very lousy legislators on the Republican side all over the country. We have some great ones, but we have some very poor ones too. That's why we need President Trump, and he's been out there fighting for all these people. It's that's why people are upset.
You were asked by the campaign to go out there immediately after the third and get on top of this. Boris came out shortly thereafter. You've been there in Nevada kind of riding over top and making sure the stuff got done. In sitting there today, 3-4 weeks since the day of voting, what did you think? What struck you as the most powerful piece of evidence that Brian Kennedy, the guy who ran Claremont, very level-headed, you sit there and go, this is pretty damning. What was it for you, having been there from the beginning of this, that you felt the most compelling as far as this thing was clearly fixed?
Well, just the mail-in ballots is the thing that really puts people off. You can see that because of the CCP virus, it allowed for mail-in ballots. And once you had this many mail-in ballots, the ability to abuse the system was there. In Pennsylvania, they were talking about matching of signatures and not being able to see people matching signatures. In Nevada, you had machines that were doing it, the accuracy of which was near zero. They were dialing down the resolution on the signature matching, and effectively, it wasn't working at all. Now, get this about Arizona, which I had not fully appreciated till today, if you can believe it, and that is, none of the 1.9 million mail-in ballots were individually, personally matched to any actual signature. So if I got a signature, I didn't compare it to a computer screen or something else. You had a sampling of those, and then they called individual people and just asked them whether they had mailed in a ballot. That was the level of signature matching here, which, if that is proven at any given level, I don't see where Arizona, the election here can stand at all.
Exactly.
And so, even though today was a set, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, you
but how did
it?
But in the middle, just
to
no. But your point's the point, and I've said from this about decertifying this or not able to certify. In the middle of that part of the presentation, I think they announced they certified the vote. The Secretary of State and the governor. How does this? If you're a Republican or a Trump person, or if you're somebody that's giving money to the Republican Party, or if you're sitting there as a Trump person, and you're listening to this, and you're going, man, this is like 100 times worse than I thought. And all of a sudden, flashing across the Newsmax screen, Secretary of State of Arizona certifies the 2020 election. Like they had to wait to the exact moment in this, right? I mean, how could that happen?
Well, I think the Republican Party, as an organization that represented a certain set of ideas, I think that had been dying for a long time. And today was the nail in the coffin. When you see that elected officials of very big states, Pennsylvania, the state legislature, they were not willing to fight and stand up. Good folks, but not willing to fight. Arizona state legislature, we saw some courageous people today, elected officials in that hearing. They're completely courageous, good guys. They were threatened, they were harassed. There's a ton of security here. They were willing to stand up. Everybody else in Arizona, they are not willing to take a stand. Governor Ducey ended his political career and probably ended the Republican Party effectively in Arizona. Who would stand up for the Republican Party when the Republican Party wouldn't stand up for their presidential nominee?
Brian,
and their sitting president.
Brian, we got 30 seconds. Where does it go from here? If they go another 8 hours, where does this go? This great presentation of the day. What happens? Give us in 30 seconds what happens in Arizona.
I think in Arizona there's going to be lawsuits filed now that they've actually certified it. They couldn't file the most effective lawsuits until today. Those are going to get filed. Black letter of the law. I think in Arizona, President Trump will either have this election, invalidated, or the court is going to have the legislature come back in and vote. And so I'm confident about Arizona. I'm confident about Arizona. I think we can send this to the House.
Brian Kennedy, thank you very much. Fantastic. We'll put your social media up in the next segment. Brian Kennedy from out in Arizona. Be back in a moment.